The officers came looking for a Navy SEAL, but the dog already seemed to know why they were coming. Winter settled heavily over the mountains of Wyoming that night. Snow drifted across the dark valley in long silver sheets, covering roads, fences, and forgotten trails beneath a blanket of white. The wind moved through the pines with a low, mournful sound that echoed across the hills like a distant warning. Miles from the nearest town, a small log cabin stood alone beneath the storm clouds. Warm light glowed behind frosted windows. Inside, Nathan Carter sat beside a stone fireplace, a mug of black coffee resting in his hands. The retired Navy SEAL had learned to appreciate silence. After years of missions, noise no longer comforted him. Quiet did. The scent of burning pine filled the room. Shadows danced across the wooden walls. Near the fireplace, Shadow lay stretched across a thick rug. The 8-year-old German shepherd appeared relaxed, his black and tan coat glowing softly in the firelight. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow. Everything felt peaceful. Then suddenly Shadow lifted his head. Nathan noticed immediately. The dog was staring toward the front door. His ears stood upright. Every muscle in his body seemed alert. Nathan set down his coffee. "What is it, buddy?" he asked quietly. Shadow did not move. He simply watched the door. Seconds passed. The fire crackled softly. Snow tapped against the windows. Nathan listened carefully, but heard nothing unusual. No vehicle. No footsteps. No voices. Yet Shadow slowly rose to his feet and walked across the room. He stopped directly in front of the entrance and sat down. Waiting. Nathan frowned. Over the years, he had learned something important about the dog. Shadow rarely reacted without a reason. More than once his instincts had proven correct before any evidence existed. Another minute passed. Then came 3 slow knocks. Nathan felt a chill crawl across the back of his neck. The dog had reacted long before anyone reached the porch. He stood and crossed the room. When he opened the door, freezing air rushed inside. 2 men stood beneath the porch light, covered in snow from head to toe. Their jackets were dusted white. Their faces looked exhausted from hours of travel through the storm. One was younger, broad-shouldered, with tired blue eyes. The other carried a weathered leather case beneath one arm. "Nathan Carter?" the older officer asked. Nathan nodded. "That depends who's asking." The man managed a weary smile. "Officer Ryan Foster. This is Officer Mark Sullivan. Sorry for showing up so late." Nathan glanced toward the storm. Nobody drives through weather like this without a good reason. Ryan exchanged a look with Mark. Neither answered immediately. Behind Nathan, Shadow remained perfectly still. The German shepherd was not watching the officers. He was staring directly at the leather case in Mark's hand. His gaze never left it. Mark seemed to notice. Slowly, he lowered the case toward the floor. The moment it moved, Shadow released a low whine unlike any sound Nathan had heard from him in years. And suddenly, for reasons he could not explain, Nathan felt certain that whatever was inside that case had something to do with a part of his life he thought had been buried forever. The wind pushed against the cabin walls as Nathan stepped aside and invited the 2 officers inside. Snow swirled across the wooden floor before the heavy door closed behind them. For a moment, nobody spoke. The warmth of the fireplace seemed almost unreal after the freezing darkness outside. Ryan Foster removed his gloves and rubbed feeling back into his hands. Mark Sullivan carefully placed the leather case on a chair near the fire. The moment he let go, Shadow took a single step forward. Nathan noticed immediately. The dog was not acting fearful. He was acting attentive, focused, almost concerned. "Coffee?" Nathan asked. Both officers nodded gratefully. Soon 3 steaming mugs rested on the table between them. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with pine smoke and wet wool. Outside, the storm continued to howl through the mountains. Inside, the room felt suspended between past and present. Nathan sat across from the officers while Shadow remained near the leather case. His amber eyes never drifted away from it. "You said you had a reason for coming all this way," Nathan said quietly. Ryan exchanged a glance with Mark. "We do." Mark rested both hands around his mug. "We have been reviewing an old case." Nathan waited. 9 years old. Something shifted in the room. The fire popped softly. Shadow's ears twitched. Nathan leaned back slightly. "That is a long time to keep looking." Ryan nodded. "Most people stopped looking years ago." Mark reached toward the leather case. The dog immediately stood. Nathan felt a strange tension settle into his chest. Mark unlatched the case, and opened it carefully. Inside were several documents, a weathered notebook, and an envelope sealed inside a clear protective sleeve. But none of those items caught Shadow's attention. Instead, the dog fixed his gaze on a single photograph tucked beneath the papers. Mark slowly removed it. The edges were faded, the colors softened by time. The moment the photograph became visible, Shadow froze completely. Nathan stared at the dog. He had never seen that expression before. Not excitement, not fear, recognition. The German shepherd moved closer until his nose nearly touched the image. Then he released a low sound deep in his throat, a sound filled with memory. Nathan reached out and accepted the photograph. The second he saw the face staring back at him, the world seemed to stop. Snow vanished. The cabin vanished. Even the voices around him disappeared. A younger man smiled from the photograph beneath a bright summer sky. One hand rested on the shoulder of a young German shepherd. The same German shepherd now standing beside the table. Nathan felt his throat tighten. "Tyler," he whispered. The name escaped before he could stop it. Ryan lowered his eyes. Mark nodded slowly. "We thought you might recognize him." Nathan stared at the image. Tyler Brooks. His closest friend. The man who had disappeared 9 years earlier without a trace. The man nobody had been able to find. Beside him, Shadow carefully touched the photograph with his nose and sat down. His eyes never left Tyler's face. Nathan looked from the dog to the officers. "Tell me exactly where you found this." Ryan took a slow breath. "That is why we came." Then Mark reached back into the leather case and removed something else. A worn military dog tag hanging from an old chain. The instant it appeared, Shadow let out a sharp whine and rushed toward it. Shadow reached the dog tag before anyone could stop him. The chain swung gently from Mark Sullivan's hand as the German shepherd pressed his nose against the worn metal. Then something unexpected happened. The dog lowered himself onto the floor and stared at the tag without moving. Nathan felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had seen Shadow recognize people before. He had seen him remember places. But this was different. This felt deeper, older, almost as if the dog had been carrying this memory for years and suddenly found proof that it had been real all along. The fire crackled softly behind them. Outside, the storm continued to sweep across the mountains, rattling the cabin windows with icy gusts. Mark carefully lowered the dog tag onto the table. Shadow immediately moved closer. His amber eyes never left it. Ryan Foster leaned forward slightly. "When we found the photograph, we thought it might help identify some personal items. We did not expect this reaction." Nathan picked up the chain. The metal felt cold against his fingers. Time had scratched the surface, but the engraved letters remained visible. Tyler Brooks. Seeing the name again felt like opening a door he had spent years trying to keep closed. Memories flooded back without permission. Summer sunlight. Long training days. Shared jokes around campfires. Tyler throwing a tennis ball while a much younger Shadow sprinted across an open field to retrieve it. Nathan remembered how quickly the dog had bonded with Tyler. Sometimes it seemed they understood each other without words. "You said you found these recently," Nathan said quietly. Ryan nodded. 3 weeks ago." "Where?" Mark opened the notebook resting inside the leather case. Several pages contained maps and handwritten notes. He carefully turned to a marked section. An abandoned ranger station near Black Pine Ridge. Nathan frowned. The name sounded familiar. The station had been closed for years. Very few people ever traveled there anymore, especially during winter. Mark continued. A volunteer hiking group discovered a damaged storage compartment beneath the building. Most of what was inside was ruined by moisture and time, but a few items survived. Nathan looked down at the photograph again. Tyler's smile seemed frozen in another lifetime. 9 years. 9 long years without answers. 9 years of rumors, theories, and unanswered questions. Beside him, Shadow released a soft whine. Nathan glanced at the dog. The German shepherd was no longer looking at the photograph or the dog tag. Instead, his attention had shifted toward the notebook. More specifically, toward one page hidden near the middle. Mark noticed it too. "That is strange," he murmured. Shadow stepped closer and placed one paw against the edge of the table. His gaze remained fixed on the notebook. Nathan slowly opened it to the page the dog seemed interested in. A folded photograph slipped loose and landed on the wood. The room fell silent. It showed Tyler standing beside an old wooden structure deep in the forest. Behind him hung a weathered sign. Nathan stared at the image. His heartbeat quickened. He recognized the place immediately. It was not the ranger station. It was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere Tyler had taken him years ago. Somewhere no search report had ever mentioned. Shadow stared at the photograph, then turned toward the front door and let out a sharp bark. The bark echoed through the cabin and then vanished into the sound of the storm outside. Everyone froze. Shadow stood facing the front door, his ears forward, his body tense with purpose. Nathan stared at the old photograph lying on the table. The image showed Tyler smiling beside a weathered wooden structure hidden deep in the forest. He knew that place. More importantly, he knew what that place meant. For a moment he said nothing. Firelight flickered across his face while memories rose from corners of his mind he had avoided for years. Ryan Foster noticed the change immediately. "You recognize it," he said quietly. Nathan nodded. His eyes remained fixed on the photograph. "I have been there before." Mark Sullivan leaned forward. "Where is it?" Nathan took a slow breath. Outside, snow hissed against the windows. Inside, the scent of pine smoke hung heavily in the air. "About 30 miles north of here," he said. "Deep in the mountains beyond Black Pine Ridge." Ryan exchanged a glance with Mark. "It is not on any of the official maps we found." "That does not surprise me." Nathan looked down at the photograph again. "Most people do not know it exists." Shadow let out another short bark. The German shepherd walked to the door and then back to the table. It was obvious he wanted their attention. Nathan watched him carefully. The dog was trying to communicate something. Not fear. Not anxiety. Urgency. "Easy, buddy," Nathan said softly. Shadow immediately returned to the photograph and touched it with his nose. Then he looked directly at Nathan. The room fell silent. Nathan suddenly remembered a summer evening almost a decade earlier. Tyler had been sitting beside a campfire while Shadow rested near his feet. The sky had been crowded with stars. The mountains had glowed beneath moonlight. Tyler had stared into the flames for a long time before speaking. "If anything ever happens to me," he had said quietly, "promise me you will look after him." Nathan had laughed at the time. "Nothing is going to happen to you." Tyler smiled but never looked away from the fire. "Just promise me." Nathan remembered the moment with painful clarity now. The warmth of the fire. The smell of pine. The way Shadow had lifted his head when he heard Tyler's voice. Across the table, Mark carefully closed the notebook. "There is something else." He reached into the leather case and removed a folded sheet of paper protected inside clear plastic. "We found this beside the photograph." Nathan accepted it. The paper contained only a few handwritten words and a rough sketch of mountain trails. Most of the writing had faded. Only one sentence remained readable. "The cabin remembers." Nathan felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. He recognized the handwriting instantly. "Tyler." Ryan watched his reaction. "What does it mean?" Nathan looked toward the dark window. Beyond the glass, the mountains waited beneath snow and darkness. Somewhere out there stood the place from the photograph. Somewhere out there was a piece of Tyler's story that had never been found. Before Nathan could answer, Shadow moved to the door again. This time he did not bark. He simply sat down and stared at it, waiting, as if he already knew where they needed to go next. For several minutes nobody moved. The fire continued to crackle softly while snow drifted past the cabin windows. Shadow remained seated by the door, patient but unwavering. He looked back at Nathan every few seconds as if waiting for a decision that had already been made. Nathan understood that feeling. He had trusted the dog through difficult situations before. Whenever Shadow became this focused, there was always a reason. Ryan Foster broke the silence first. "You are thinking about going there tonight, are you not?" Nathan glanced toward the storm beyond the glass. Common sense said they should wait until morning. The mountains were dangerous enough in daylight. At night, during a winter storm, they became something else entirely. Yet the photograph on the table kept pulling at his thoughts. So did the faded note. "The cabin remembers." Tyler's words seemed to linger in the room long after the paper had been folded away. Nathan stood and walked toward a storage cabinet beside the fireplace. He removed flashlights, extra batteries, heavy gloves, emergency blankets, and a first aid kit. Ryan sighed quietly. "That answers my question." Mark Sullivan smiled faintly. "I had a feeling it would." Shadow immediately rose to his feet. The moment he saw Nathan gathering equipment, the dog's tail moved once against the floor. Not excitement. Recognition. As though he had been expecting this all along. 20 minutes later the truck rolled through the storm. Headlights pushed narrow beams through swirling snow while the mountains disappeared into darkness on every side. Nathan drove carefully along an old forest road. Ryan sat beside him studying the trail map. Mark occupied the rear seat. Shadow sat upright between them, his eyes fixed on the windshield. The German shepherd had not rested once since leaving the cabin. His attention never wandered. The farther they traveled, the more focused he became. Snow-covered pines lined both sides of the road. Occasionally branches bent beneath the weight of fresh snowfall. The world felt isolated, silent except for the wind. Nearly 45 minutes passed before Nathan slowed the truck. According to the map, they should have been approaching the area from the photograph. Ryan checked a GPS unit. "We are close." Nathan nodded. Before anyone could say another word, Shadow suddenly stood. His ears lifted sharply. A low sound escaped his throat. The dog pressed his nose against the side window. Nathan followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing except darkness and snow. Then a faint shape emerged between the trees. A narrow trail almost completely hidden beneath drifting snow. It was not marked on any map. Ryan frowned. "I did not see that road." "Neither did I," Nathan replied. Shadow pawed at the door. Once. Then again. The message was unmistakable. The dog wanted out. Nathan brought the truck to a stop. Freezing air rushed inside as he opened the door. Shadow leaped into the snow without hesitation. The German shepherd landed, looked back to make sure they were following, and immediately started down the hidden trail. Nathan grabbed a flashlight and stepped out after him. The beam cut through the darkness ahead. Far beyond the trees, barely visible through the storm, stood the faint outline of an old wooden structure waiting in the night. The hidden trail wound deeper into the forest with every step. Snow crunched beneath their boots while the beam from Nathan's flashlight danced across tree trunks and drifting white shadows. The wind had weakened here. Tall pines blocked the worst of the storm, creating a strange pocket of silence in the mountains. Ahead of them, Shadow moved with complete certainty. The German shepherd never hesitated. He never searched left or right. He simply followed a path that seemed invisible to everyone else. Nathan watched him carefully. The dog had taken the lead the moment they left the truck, and somehow nobody questioned it anymore. Ryan Foster adjusted his collar against the cold. "Are you sure this is the place from the photograph?" Nathan nodded. "I have not seen it in years, but I would know that trail anywhere." The outline of the old structure gradually emerged through the snowfall. As they approached, details became visible. Weathered wooden walls, a sagging roof, frost-covered windows hidden beneath layers of age and neglect. The building stood alone among the trees like a forgotten memory. Shadow reached the porch first. Instead of rushing inside, he stopped. His ears lifted. His nose moved slowly through the air. Then he climbed the steps and sat beside the front door. Waiting. Nathan stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked beneath his boots. Snow had collected in corners untouched for years. He brushed frost from a small metal plaque mounted beside the entrance. The lettering had faded, but enough remained to read. Nathan felt his chest tighten. This was the place. Long ago, Tyler had brought him here during a summer hiking trip. They had spent an afternoon exploring abandoned trails and talking about everything from future plans to old regrets. Nathan remembered Shadow as a young dog racing through the trees while Tyler laughed from the porch. The memory felt impossibly distant now. Ryan pushed gently against the door. It opened with a low groan. Cold air drifted from the darkness inside. Flashlights illuminated a single room coated in dust. Broken furniture rested against the walls. A stone fireplace occupied one corner. Time seemed frozen within the cabin. Mark Sullivan swept his light across the interior. Nobody has been here for years. Nathan stepped inside. Something about the room felt familiar. Not because he remembered the layout. Because he remembered the feeling. Tyler had loved this place. He once called it the quietest spot in Wyoming. Shadow entered next. The German shepherd ignored everything around him. He moved directly across the room toward the fireplace. Nathan noticed immediately. The dog sniffed along the stone base. Then he stopped. His tail became still. His entire body focused on a single section near the floor. Ryan watched curiously. "What is he doing?" Nathan did not answer. Shadow lowered his head and pawed gently at the wooden boards beside the fireplace. Once, then again, dust lifted into the flashlight beams. Mark crouched beside the dog. "There is something here." Nathan knelt and brushed away years of dirt. Beneath the debris, a narrow seam appeared between the floorboards. A hidden compartment. The three men exchanged silent looks. Shadow stepped back and sat down. His job was done. Nathan carefully gripped the edge of the concealed panel and lifted. Beneath it rested a small weatherproof metal box. Across the lid, protected from time and weather, someone had written a single name in black marker. Tyler. For a long moment, nobody touched the box. The flashlight beams trembled slightly across the metal surface while snow whispered against the cabin walls outside. Time seemed to slow inside the forgotten room. Nathan stared at the name written across the lid. Tyler. 9 years had passed since anyone had seen him. 9 years of questions, theories, and empty conclusions. Yet somehow his presence suddenly felt close enough to touch. Shadow sat quietly beside the hidden compartment. The German shepherd no longer appeared restless. His ears were relaxed. His breathing was calm. It was as though he had finally arrived at the place he had been searching for all along. Ryan Foster knelt beside Nathan. "Open it," he said softly. Nathan nodded. Carefully, he brushed away the remaining dust and lifted the metal latches. The hinges groaned faintly as the lid rose. A stale breath of air escaped from inside. Then the contents came into view. Several notebooks rested neatly inside, protected by waterproof coverings. Beneath them sat a stack of envelopes bound together with faded cord. There were photographs, folded maps, and a small leather journal worn smooth by years of handling. Everything had been arranged with care, deliberately, as though Tyler had expected someone to find it one day. Mark Sullivan slowly exhaled. This could answer everything. Nathan reached for the top notebook. The first page contained Tyler's handwriting. The familiar letters instantly pulled him backward through time. He remembered Tyler filling journals during long trips, always writing observations that nobody else bothered to record. Small details, thoughts, stories, things that mattered. Nathan carefully turned several pages. Most contained personal notes, dates, sketches of trails, and reflections about the mountains. Then he found something unexpected. Tucked between 2 pages was a photograph. He pulled it free. Ryan leaned closer. The image showed Tyler sitting outside this very cabin years earlier. Beside him sat a much younger Shadow. The German shepherd's ears were oversized and uneven. Tyler was laughing at something beyond the camera. Nathan felt a sharp ache in his chest. He remembered taking that photograph. It had been one of the happiest days any of them had shared together. Shadow noticed the image immediately. The dog stepped forward and gently touched it with his nose. Then he sat down again. His amber eyes remained fixed on Tyler's face. Nathan swallowed hard. "You never forgot him," he whispered. The dog lowered his head slightly. Ryan carefully lifted one of the envelopes. Across the front, written in dark ink, were 4 words. "If Nathan finds this." The room fell silent once more. Even the wind seemed distant. Nathan accepted the envelope with steady hands. The paper had aged but remained intact. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Every letter belonged to Tyler. Every stroke carried the voice of a man who had vanished nearly a decade earlier. Nathan slowly broke the seal. A folded letter rested inside. Before unfolding it, he noticed something else at the bottom of the envelope. A small key attached to a metal tag. On the tag was a simple message. "The truth is not here. Follow the key." The small key rested in Nathan's palm while silence settled over the abandoned cabin. Outside, snow drifted through the darkness, brushing softly against the weathered walls. Inside, 3 men and a German shepherd stared at an object that seemed impossibly ordinary for something that had survived 9 years waiting to be found. Nathan turned the metal tag over. There was nothing else written on it. Just those 5 words. "The truth is not here. Follow the key." Ryan Foster slowly shook his head. Tyler knew somebody would eventually find this. Nathan looked down at the letter still resting in his hands. "Not somebody." His voice softened. "Me." The fireless cabin felt colder suddenly. Shadow remained beside him, watching every movement. The German shepherd's attention never drifted far from the envelope. Nathan carefully unfolded the letter. The paper crackled softly with age. The handwriting was unmistakable. Tyler's voice seemed to return to the room through every line. Nathan began reading silently. The first paragraphs contained memories, stories about mountain trails, reflections on friendship, observations about life that sounded exactly like the man Nathan remembered. Then the letter changed. The words became more personal, more direct. Tyler wrote about trust, about unfinished journeys, about promises. Nathan stopped when he reached one particular sentence. For years, he had tried not to think about the last conversation they shared. Yet Tyler remembered it perfectly. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. The memory returned immediately. A summer evening beneath the stars. A campfire glowing between them. Shadow lying nearby. Tyler staring into the flames before quietly asking for a promise. If anything ever happens to me, look after Shadow. Nathan remembered laughing at the time. He remembered insisting nothing would happen. Yet somehow Tyler had insisted. Now, 9 years later, the same promise appeared on the page before him. Nathan felt his throat tighten. The next section explained the key. Not completely, just enough. Tyler described a place hidden beyond the old ranger station. A place he trusted more than any bank or storage unit. A place where the final answers had been left behind. Ryan listened carefully as Nathan read portions aloud. Mark Sullivan studied the notebooks spread across the floor. Every clue seemed connected to the same destination. Every trail pointed in one direction. Then Nathan reached the final paragraph. His voice became quiet. If Shadow is with you when you read this, tell him I never forgot him. Tell him he was the best partner I ever had. And tell him I knew he would find his way back here someday. The room fell silent. Shadow slowly approached. The German shepherd lowered his head onto Nathan's knee and remained there. No barking, no movement, just quiet understanding. Nathan rested one hand on the dog's neck. For several moments, nobody spoke. The storm outside seemed distant now, almost irrelevant. Mark finally pointed toward the key. Do you know where it goes? Nathan looked down at the metal object. Then he remembered something. A small locker hidden inside the ranger station Tyler used years ago. A place nobody had mentioned during the investigation. A place he had completely forgotten until now. Ryan saw the realization in his eyes. You know, Nathan nodded slowly. He folded the letter and slipped it carefully into his jacket pocket. Shadow immediately stood. His ears lifted. His tail moved once. The dog walked toward the cabin door and stopped, waiting, just as he had done from the beginning. And for the second time that night, it became clear that Shadow was not following the search anymore. He was leading it. The remainder of the night passed in a blur of snow, headlights, and quiet determination. Guided by Tyler's letter and the forgotten memories it awakened, Nathan, Ryan, Mark, and Shadow made their way to the abandoned ranger station before dawn. The building stood weathered and silent beneath a sky slowly turning gray. Snow covered the roof and drifted against the walls, but the structure remained standing, stubborn against time. Inside, dust coated every surface. Old shelves leaned against cracked walls. The scent of aged wood lingered in the cold air. Nathan moved directly toward a row of rusted storage lockers hidden in a back room. He knew exactly which one Tyler had used years ago. For a moment, he simply stared at it. Then he reached into his pocket and removed the small key. Shadow stood beside him, calm and watchful. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease. A soft click echoed through the room. Nathan opened the door. Inside rested a single weatherproof case. Nothing more, nothing less. Tyler had left only what mattered. Back at the cabin later that morning, they opened the case beside the fireplace. The storm had finally begun to fade. Pale sunlight filtered through the windows, casting warm beams across the room. Within the case were additional journals, letters, photographs, and documents that completed the story Tyler had been trying to preserve. The answers were not dramatic. They were human, honest. The records clarified misunderstandings that had followed his name for years. They revealed his choices, his hopes, and his reasons. Most importantly, they restored the truth. Ryan and Mark spent the following weeks organizing everything. Questions that had remained unanswered for nearly a decade finally found resolution. Families received letters they never knew existed. Old assumptions quietly disappeared. Tyler's name was remembered the way it deserved to be remembered. Through integrity, through friendship, through the kindness he had shown others. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. Snow retreated from the valleys. Pine trees brightened beneath longer days. One clear afternoon, a small memorial gathering took place on a hillside overlooking Wyoming's endless ridges. The sky stretched blue from horizon to horizon. Gentle wind moved through the grass. There were no crowds, no reporters, no grand ceremony, only people who genuinely cared. Nathan stood near a simple memorial stone engraved with Tyler's name. Ryan and Mark stood nearby, Several old friends had traveled long distances to attend. Stories were shared. Some brought laughter. Some brought tears. All brought peace. Shadow remained beside Nathan throughout the entire gathering. The German shepherd's muzzle carried more gray than it once had, but his amber eyes remained bright. Whenever someone spoke about Tyler, the dog seemed to listen, as if the name still meant something important. Eventually, the gathering ended. Vehicles departed. Voices faded into the distance. The hillside grew quiet. Only Nathan and Shadow remained beside the memorial. The afternoon sun painted the mountains gold. Nathan sat on the grass and looked across the valley. For a long time he said nothing. Shadow settled beside him and rested his head gently against Nathan's leg. The familiar gesture carried years of trust, years of loyalty, years of shared memories. Nathan smiled softly and scratched behind the dog's ears. "I kept my promise," he whispered. Shadow lifted his eyes toward him. In that moment, Nathan finally understood something that had taken 9 years to learn. Tyler had asked him to take care of Shadow. He had spent all those years believing that was the promise. But the truth was larger than that. Shadow had been keeping a promise too. He had carried Tyler's memory when others could not. He had recognized the photograph, the dog tag, the trail, the cabin. He had led them through every step of the journey. Not because he understood documents or investigations, but because he never forgot the people he loved. The wind moved softly through the grass. Far below, sunlight shimmered across the valley. Nathan rested his hand on Shadow's shoulder while the old German shepherd leaned closer. The mountains stood silent around them, timeless and steady. And for the first time in 9 years, nothing felt unfinished anymore. A friend had been honored. A promise had been fulfilled. A truth had finally come home. And beside the memorial, beneath the warm light of spring, a loyal German shepherd closed his eyes and rested peacefully, knowing that the journey he had carried in his heart for so long was finally complete.